Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you on the hour. On the phone with us for the hour, Lamar Waldron, political commentator, JFK historian, the author of most recently his book, The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination. He also has a book about Watergate out and Richard Nixon. Lamar and I together worked on Ultimate Sacrifice and Legacy of Secrecy, two books about the Kennedy assassination and the assassination of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King. Lamar, we were talking about the parallels between this Trump administration being advised by Roger Stone and the Nixon administration being advised by Roger Stone. We haven't yet gotten to Paul Manafort's connection to the Reagan and Bush administrations and Donald Trump. But it's like, you know, history repeats itself. We were just about to get into Ollie North. Tell us about Ollie North.
Well, so what happened was Congress did not want the United States, supplying basically a bunch of right-wing death squads that were the Contras. You know, they weren't like some little band of freedom fighters. They were, put together by big money from conservative interest in Central America and in the United States. So Congress passed a law that said you can't send money to these right-wing death squads called the Contra. And instead, they the Reagan-Bush administration, they tried to get around that law, and they did all sorts of complicated deals with Israel, and then selling arms to the Iranians, and then using that money to fund the Contras, and Oliver North was at the center of all that. And I should point out this huge parallel too, because the whole Iran-Contra deal was it's like the stepchild of Watergate, because there were a lot of Cuban exiles involved in the Iran-Contra operation, working for the United States, for the United States CIA, that, of course, Vice President Bush had formerly headed the CIA. And, of course, if you go all the way back to Watergate, you have, all the Watergate burglars were veterans of the CIA anti-Castro, the Castro assassination operation, some of them still on the CIA payroll. So you also have this CIA parallel back in Watergate, when, of course, E. Howard Hunt, who had been the chief of covert operations for all of Western Europe, that he was the ringleader of the plumbers during the Watergate operation, and one of his chief aides, going all the way back to the 60s, when you and I investigated all the Cuban exiles, their activities of the 60s, and they show up in Iran-Contra. So are
they still tied to the mob bosses, Marcello and Trafficante?
Well, in fact, some of them were, because then if you think back to the whole Iran-Contra era, the other thing that came out that great reporter Gary Webb tried to expose so hard and did expose, only to have his newspaper, pull the rug out from under him and have major news organizations like the Washington Post attack him. Gary Webb pointed out that drug dealing was also used during Iran-Contra to generate income to supply the right-wing death squads called the Contras. And so, and eventually the CIA, after Gary Webb, the poor guy was driven to his death, basically, hounded by the CIA and CIA-backed media people. Then the CIA Inspector General eventually said, Gary Webb was right. Yeah, there was a lot of drug dealing among the former CIA and current CIA people who were funding the Contras.
Can you put Ollie North in the middle of that?
Well, he was in the middle of it. He skated. So Oliver North testified to Congress under an oath of immunity. However, he was later convicted, but then his conviction was overturned, and I think there was a Reagan-appointed judge involved, and it was a little odd. So his conviction was overturned because they claimed prosecutors actually used some of his immunized testimony when they prosecuted him. So here you've got a guy who was convicted, and then his conviction was overturned literally on a technicality by, I believe it was a Reagan-appointed judge.
Right, and now he's going to run the NRA.
Well, like I say, you can't make this stuff up. And then, of course, you have all the information now where it turns out that several people, backed by Putin, were providing funds and who knows what other kind of assistance to the NRA. The NRA, I don't think they ever put as much money into an election as they put into Donald Trump's election.
Right.
So you just have this constant pattern of corruption and illicit money going on. And to make Oliver North, to ask the NRA, you just can't make this stuff up. I should point out something else really important, though, because we have the confirmation hearings coming up tomorrow for the new CIA
let's
director.
do that when we come back from on the. You're here with us for the hour, right, Lamar?
Sure, as long as you want me here.
Okay,
Tom,
and you can take calls from listeners.
No problem at all.
Okay, so if you've got a question about the assassinations of John Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy, or what's going on right now with the Trump administration and Ollie North, hang on.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Give us a call at 202-808-9925, and we will put you on the air with Lamar Waldron. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Unequal Protection, How Corporations Became People and How You Can Fight Back by Thom Hartmann. This is from the introduction titled The Battle to Save Democracy. Excuse me. On September 2nd, 2009, the transnational pharmaceutical giant Pfizer pled guilty to multiple criminal felonies. It had been marketing drugs in a way that may well have led to the deaths of people, and that definitely led physicians to prescribe and patients to use pharmaceuticals in a way that for which they were not intended. Because Pfizer is a corporation, a legal abstraction, really, it couldn't go to jail like fraudster Bernie Madoff or killer John Dillinger. Instead, it paid a $1.2 billion criminal fine to the U.S. government, the biggest in history, as well as an additional $1 billion in civil penalties. The total settlement was more than $2.3 billion, another record. None of Pfizer's executives, decision makers, stockholders, owners, or employees saw even 5 minutes of the inside of a police station or a jail. Most Americans don't even know about this huge and massive crime, nor do they know that the criminal never spent a day in jail. But they do know that in the autumn of 2004, Martha Stewart was convicted of lying to investigators about her sale of stock in another pharmaceutical company. Her crime cost nobody their life, but she famously was escorted off to a women's prison. Had she been a corporation instead of a human being, odds are there would not have even been an investigation. Yet over the past century, and particularly the past 40 years, corporations have repeatedly asserted that they are, in fact, persons, and therefore eligible for the human rights protections of the Bill of Rights. In 2009, the right-wing advocacy group Citizens United argued before the Supreme Court that they had the First Amendment right to free speech and to influence elections through the production and distribution of a slasher documentary designed to destroy Hillary Clinton's ability to win the Democratic nomination. Some political observers assert that they did this in part because they believed that a black man whose first name sounded like Osama and whose middle name was Hussein could never, ever possibly win against a Republican, no matter how poor a candidate they put up. In that, they were following on a 2003 case before the Supreme Court in which Nike claimed it had the First Amendment right to lie in its corporate marketing, a variation of the First Amendment right of free speech. Corporations haven't limited their grasp to the First Amendment. Pretty much any and virtually every amendment that could be used to further corporate interests has been fair game. As you'll learn in this book, in previous decades, a chemical company took to the Supreme Court a case asserting its Fourth Amendment right to privacy from the EPA, snooping into its illegal chemical discharges. Other corporations have asserted Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, as well as asserting the 14th Amendment, passed after the Civil War to strip slavery from the Constitution, asserting that it protects their right against discrimination by a local community that doesn't want them building a toxic waste incinerator, commercial hog operations, or superstores. If this trend continues, it's probably just a matter of time before a corporation claims the Second Amendment right to bear arms anywhere, anytime, and your credit card company's bill collector shows up at your home with a sidearm. This legal situation is not only bizarre, but also quite the opposite of the visions for this country held by the founders of the nation and the framers of the Constitution. They were sufficiently worried about corporate power that they didn't even include in the Constitution the word corporation, intending instead that the states should tightly regulate corporate behavior, which the states did quite well until just after the Civil War. The American Revolution, you'll learn in this book, was in fact provoked by the misbehavior of a British corporation. Our nation was founded in an anti-corporate power fury. The most significant and oft-quoted precedent of the turning point of corporate power in America began just after the Civil War. It rested on a constitutional amendment successfully written and passed by a group of radical Republicans after the Civil War. That's what they called themselves, radical Republicans, to take slavery out of the Constitution. Given that today's Republican Party has, largely since the robber baron era of the 1880s, been the party of big business and the very rich, it's a bit difficult for some people to get their minds around the possibility that the Republican Party started out as a reform party, that for nearly 70 years, from before Abraham Lincoln until just after Theodore Roosevelt left the party to start a third party, had a strong progressive wing. But the Republican Party did. Although Lincoln was, by today's standards, a moderate Republican, he was still anti-slavery, pro-middle class, and pro-labor. In fact, he famously said labor is superior to capital because it precedes capital. Nobody has wealth until somebody makes something. And he was the first president both to use the word strike in public and to actually stop police and private armies from killing and beating strikers. And just like in today's mainstream Democratic Party, where there's a progressive minority that always seems to be pushing the edges, in the Republican Party of the 1800s, there was a very, even by today's standards, progressive faction. The radical Republicans were a splinter group that emerged in a big way from the Republican Party at its founding in 1854. And just after the Civil War in 1866, they gained a majority among Republicans in the House of Representatives, where they had a powerful influence until the faction disintegrated in the 1870s during the presidency of Ulysses S. Grant. They supported the absolute right of freed slaves to vote and participate in government. It goes on from there. Unequal protection, corporate power. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Lamar Waldron. Lamar, the author of The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, among other books. And Lamar, excuse me, do you see any, we've got a bunch of people who have questions for you, too, on the phone here. Let me ask you one quick question, and then we'll pick up some phone calls. Do you see any parallels between Trump's political espionage in the Iran nuclear deal and the crimes of the Nixon administration? You mentioned earlier, Nixon had his enemies list, but it was done in-house. This has been exported. Is this part of a larger trend on the part of Republicans to privatize government, or what?
Well, I mean, it's simply a matter of, again, I'm glad you mentioned the enemies list because, Nixon he had two enemies lists. One had about 20 people on it, and the other one had like 500 people on it. He tried to get the IRS to go after these people. He tried to get the Federal Communications Committee. It was a great memo written by John Dean that said we're going to try to use the agencies of the federal government to screw our enemies. And it's no secret who Trump considers to be his enemies. And, how much Trump is outsourcing. I mean, we know about these two officials and the smear against them, and like I say, there appears to be, a break-in involved as well of an organization in Washington that supports the Iran nuclear deal. What is Trump doing in-house that we may not even know about? Because, of course, Roger Stone, one of Trump's top advisors even today, and of course he's right in the middle of all the Russia stuff, he got his start as a very low-level operative for Richard Nixon's political, what they used to call dirty tricks operations. Some of them were criminal operations. Not that necessarily Stone was involved, but other people. And so Roger Stone is that thread that follows right from Richard Nixon to Donald Trump. And what don't we know right now? What has Mueller found out? How many other smear operations, how many other break-ins have there been? And, people like to say, well, Mueller hasn't turned up anything significant, and I think just the reverse. These guys don't investigate for a year with this bunch of really sharp federal prosecutors and investigators. I think they've turned up all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
And when you've got
well, they've already got over 30 indictments, I believe.
Well, and so if we're looking to keep score in Watergate, most people don't know this because of so much government secrecy and CIA secrecy surrounding, Watergate, Iran-Contra, all these things. But there were 70 people that were indicted or convicted or who pled guilty in around the Watergate crimes. And so the question is Donald Trump going to exceed that or not? I noticed that article recently that said that Robert Mueller got 70 blank subpoenas, basically,
right.
for his Paul
just for
Manafort investigation alone.
Yeah.
That was on top of 35 he already got. So there's more than 100 subpoenas just on the Paul Manafort side alone. So I am guessing once we know what Mueller has really found, we're going to find something that could well top the incredible criminal pyramid that Richard Nixon had, that again flared up again in Republican politics in Iran-Contra with Oliver North. And remember, the only reason that later President Bush Sr., wasn't, impeached, indicted, sent to prison, whatever, was he pardoned his former Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger.
Right.
So they had gone up the chain of command, just as Nixon, his underlings, a lot of them had to go to prison. He didn't. They had gone up the chain of command through people like Oliver North and these lower-level officials. They'd gotten to the Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, and then, he was going to be flipped onto Vice President, then President Bush, and Bush simply pardoned Caspar Weinberger, so he didn't have to testify against Bush, and we're talking Bush Sr. here, and then of course that brought us that Bush's son as our later president, and all those horrible abuses in the wake of 9/11, the Second Iraq War, and all of the CIA shenanigans that went on, and I call them shenanigans, they were horrible crimes, of all the tortures of people and the cooking of the books in terms of the intelligence to somehow justify the Second Iraq War. And now we're getting ready to have a CIA director have confirmation hearings tomorrow who is in the middle of all of that.
Mm. Yeah. And speaking of what, I do want to get to our callers here, but your quick thoughts on Gina Haspel.
Well, the problem there is, so not only was she involved, with one of these torture sites, she was involved with destroying evidence, the videotapes,
of the tortures,
and still secret to this day about Watergate, involving people like E. Howard Hunt and Bernard Barker, whose associates, Harry Williams, you and I interviewed. And then that goes all the way back to the JFK assassination. The JFK Act from 1991-92 covers all of those key Watergate figures who were active in events around the JFK assassination. People like E. Howard Hunt and Bernard Barker, Watergate burglar and the mastermind of the Watergate burglaries, E. Howard Hunt. We still don't have a lot of those secret files about those people, even though the JFK Act says they should be released. So, why confirm another CIA director who's only going to keep hiding these files from Watergate, from the JFK assassination? Some of them even involve Iran-Contra. Why have another CIA director sail through Congress on a confirmation when some senator doesn't just say, look, why can't you make all of that stuff public? Why do you have to keep all of that stuff secret?
Okay, last real quick question.
Was a long time ago.
We know now that Richard Nixon blew up the Lyndon Johnson's peace deal with the South Vietnamese in August, September, October of 1968, so that he could beat Hubert Humphrey in the 1968 election. And it worked. And LBJ was onto it. Everett Dirksen knew about it, but the American people didn't find out about it until both those men died.
And then treason again to elect Reagan and Bush in 1980.
Right.
By going behind the back of the Carter administration.
Right, by cutting a deal with the Iranians. So here you have two Republican presidents who committed treason to get elected. And then you had George W. Bush, who told his biographer, Nikki Herskowitz, in 99, that if he got elected in 2000, he was going to have a war with Iraq that would at least run through the election cycle of 2004, because his father's biggest mistake was having only a 100-day war rather than a war that was long enough that he could still be a war president when he went into re-election, and that George W. Bush would use that re-election momentum to privatize Social Security. And you recall his famous first speech after the 2005 election, or 2004 election, 2005 inauguration. I now have the political capital to privatize Social Security, and I'm going to spend it. So we have the last three Republican presidents, basically, every single one of them committing treason or something damn close to treason in order to get elected, in every single case leading to the death of American citizens and the destruction of American foreign policy. And the American people are still shrugging about this. The Republican Party is still ignoring it. None of this is, by and large, in dispute, and yet the news media doesn't go back to it all the time. I guarantee you, if three Democratic presidents had committed treason to hold the White House, it would be common knowledge in the mind of every single American. What makes you think, given how successfully the Republican Party and their syncopaths in the media have covered up the crimes of Republican nominees, what makes you think that this Republican presidency and the crimes that he committed on his way to becoming president, whether it's crimes, whether it's personal financial crimes, having his business empire, financed by Eastern European and Russian oligarchs, or whether it's, his ongoing refusal to participate, in U.S. intelligence operations and things when it comes to the possibility that the elections were meddled with, or, a dozen other things. What makes you think that anybody's going to be any more outraged about this Republican crime than they were about previous Republican treasons?
Well, it's simply sad because, there are journalists like yourself, like Rachel Maddow, who do a great job bringing this information to the public. But when you look at, say, your ratings or Rachel Maddow's ratings compared to the ABC Evening News, for instance, which ABC always seems to, slant things the most pro-Trump of all of the news organizations, those primetime news broadcasts, they draw lots of eyeballs. And the average person today, they're still recovering from the Republican crash of 2006, as I like to call it, because that's when it started. George Bush Jr. said, I think he told the president of Argentina, war is great for the economy. Yeah, but it's really horrible for working people in America and those who died and those who are still suffering. So the average person today, the average millennial, they're struggling to survive. They've got to have, everybody has a side gig now if you're in your 20s or 30s, because you can't make it on a regular job. So, people like you are trying to get the word out there. But, it's a tough road to hoe, and these guys are very sophisticated. Richard Nixon basically controlled most of the news media. It was only a handful of brave people like Daniel Shore that you and I talked to, eventually Walter Cronkite, and just a very small number of others. Otherwise, the mainstream news media, people forget Richard Nixon was overwhelmingly reelected by one of the largest landslides in history 5 months after the Watergate arrest.
Right, in 72, yep.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Okay, now I'm going to step out of the way and let you have your calls, your questions for Lamar Waldron. Stick around. And welcome back. Lamar Waldron, our guest, Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Randy, you're on the air with Lamar.
I'm honored to speak with you, Mr. Waldron and Mr. Hartmann.
Thank you.
You guys are so eloquent in how you put things and so precise. And I don't have the knowledge base to go from, but there's something here that's a common thread, and that's dark money that was in that followed Ollie North, and from the time that in the early 80s, there was a business model of cocaine being shipped through Florida that made millions and millions of dollars, and that was recognized by the worshipers of money, the Republican Party, and that brought us to a place where there was a guy by the name of Barry Seals that was involved in this Iran-Contra, which was shipping cocaine into Mena, Arkansas, and when he was busted, was pardoned by Bill Clinton. And it went on to, that cocaine went on to be in L.A., and there was a reporter that finally got a hold of this story and tried to bring it to light, and they found him, he was a suicide with 2 bullets in the head. So that's where Oliver North comes from. And today, what we find ourselves with is a president that all of his money is dark money. We've never seen his income tax returns, and that we have to premise what's going on today with him and the Iran deal with the Stuxnet
So, Randy,
virus.
we're down to a minute and a half. What's your question for Lamar?
I guess, shouldn't we be talking about what America did to the Stuxnet, about the Stuxnet virus, and what Netanyahu did by releasing it on the Iranians that led up to the deal we have?
Okay, Lamar.
Well, I think one big thing, and while I kind of want to drift away from your question, I do want to correct some information about Barry Seal, because there's a lot of misinformation out there on the Internet. So, yeah, Barry Seal was a pilot and a drug smuggler for the Medellin cartel, and he testified and everything. He was actually killed in 1986 by contract killers hired by Pablo Escobar. And so, there was the mention of Bill Clinton and all like that. There's a whole kind of a phony narrative that a lot of CIA-backed and Bush-backed people put out about Mena, Arkansas, and cocaine smuggling, and Bill Clinton when he was governor, that tried to make it look as if the Arkansas governor, Bill Clinton, ran the United States, and he was responsible for all the drugs that the CIA was smuggling under the Reagan-Bush administration and then under the Bush administration. And so you always have to be careful. So I always try to correct people when they repeat some of that misinformation because, Bill Clinton was not running drug smuggling by the CIA in the 1980s. No, that was officials of the Reagan-Bush administration and then the Bush administration. So I just wanted to put that correction out there so that we don't spread any of that misinformation, because a lot of CIA-backed journalists have spread that misinformation to kind of take the onus off the CIA and the secrecy that they still have around a lot of records from the Iran-Contra era.
Okay. We'll be back with more of your questions for Lamar Waldron right after this. We're talking to Lamar Waldron, the author of The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination, Ultimate Sacrifice, Legacy of Secrecy, and Others. And Tom in Seymour, Illinois. You're on the air with Lamar Waldron.
Yeah, hello. Thanks for taking my call. My question was, has the American oligarch and mafia infiltrated our government?
Sure. Going all the way back to Richard Nixon. who was basically the mafia president, the mafia in the form of Los Angeles mob boss Mickey Cohen, one of two mob bosses in L.A., contributed to Richard Nixon's first run for Congress in '46. The Mafia and Cohen again contributed to Senator Richard Nixon's election in 1950. They were again very strong for Richard Nixon when he was vice president in the 50s. Richard Nixon's main political fixer was a lawyer for mafia bookies, for more than 100 mafia bookies. So then by the time, and then Richard Nixon, when he was running against John F. Kennedy in 1960, got $1 million bribe from several of America's biggest godfathers, Carlos Marcello, Santo Trafficante, the Chicago Mafia, to try to help him defeat Senator Kennedy, who had made his reputation as a mob buster. That didn't work, and Nixon even had the CIA work with the Mafia to try and kill Fidel Castro before that election. Many of those files, by the way, are among those still secret to this day in defiance of the 1991 JFK Act. And then, of course, Richard Nixon becomes president, and all these prosecutions against the Mafia are compromised. A couple of the Watergate burglars were working for the Mafia, the CIA veterans, at the time of the Watergate arrest, and then you get into the 80s, the Oliver North era under Iran-Contra, with the Reagan-Bush administration, then the Bush administration, and again you do have a lot of cocaine dealing going on that even the CIA Inspector General eventually confirmed. So, today, the traditional Italian mafia is very much on the decline. But, when you look at huge American corporations, the oligarchs, like you say, I mean, the Russian government is practically an organized crime operation in itself, which is something that turned up in an email leaked from Hillary Clinton way back when she was Secretary of State, which is one reason Putin and the Russian government hated Hillary Clinton so much.
So the new mafia is basically the oligarch class. It's the international billionaire class. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah. I mean, so in other words, it's like, when you look at all this money, a recent report, Donald Trump, we get $400 million in cash and in business deals he was doing after 2006, when you had the crash going on. As the Washington Post reporter said, where was those $400 million coming from? So, you've got that class in America, and it's international in scope, and so. So you've got all this foreign money, all this money laundering, the huge money here, the Koch brothers and others, and Sheldon Adelson. So it's like, and now with the tax giveaway, the Republican Congress passed, for Trump, the income disparity, it's not just income, it's the total wealth disparity is just so huge that, average working Americans have little to no influence in Washington because you have to chase all this money. And so while I think there will be some sort of a blue wave this November, we haven't even seen the game plan that the Republicans and these oligarchs have to keep power. They don't like to give up that power.
Right. And the oligarchs have already announced they're going to put $400 million into this election.
And one of your earlier callers did mention the dark money, and that is the heart of everything. Is you've got all this dark money, you've got Citizens United, and again, we go back to Richard Nixon. He was just, it wasn't just that one Watergate break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters. It was Richard Nixon was getting millions and millions and millions from some of America's richest people, like Howard Hughes, America's largest corporations. A lot of those corporate people did get, convicted or pled guilty or paid huge fines. But it was just this tidal wave of money that let Richard Nixon take that money and start all of his different political crimes units, of which the plumbers who were caught at the Watergate was only one. So we don't even know what Trump is doing. Of course, he doesn't have money. God knows if he even has a positive net worth. But his supporters, the people that want to see him there, that want to have even more tax giveaways for the wealthy, they're gonna just unleash, and are unleashing already, a tidal wave of money to try to keep at least one house of Congress. And then, like I say, it's you and I, Tom, we could not believe, I'm sure, when we were voting against Richard Nixon in '72 that he got reelected by such an overwhelming majority. But he did. And so it's easy to sit here today and try to count the days until Trump is impeached or prosecuted or resigns suddenly for fictitious health reasons. But unless the Democrats get both houses of Congress, there's not going to be an impeachment. And the Republicans,
even if they do, I don't think there will be.
I'm sorry, what was that, Tom?
Even if they get both houses of Congress, he's not going to be removed from office. That takes 2/3 of the Senate. That's simply not going to happen.
So we could literally be facing 4 more years of President Trump,
or 6 more
after the
years.
next election.
Yeah.
So it's just. So all I can do is say we've got to do everything we can to have more transparency. That CIA director tomorrow needs to be grilled beyond grilled about why so many secret files about Watergate, about Iran-Contra, about the JFK assassination.
Because the one theme that runs through all these things is the association between the Republican Party and organized crime, right?
Well, and unfortunately, because I think there are a lot of good people, and the CIA as well,
right.
Often in that as well.
Right. Remarkable. Lamar Waldron, his newest book, The Hidden History of the JFK Assassination. Lamar, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate it.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com. The Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is an 1856 first English translation edition of this author. But you can still get it online, and a lot of different booksellers sell it. This is from chapter 11. What sort of despotism democratic nations have to fear? I had remarked during my stay in the United States that a democratic state of society, similar to that of the Americans, might offer singular facilities for the establishment of despotism. And I perceived, upon my return to Europe, how much use had already been made by most of our rulers of the notions, the sentiments, and the wants engendered by this same social condition for the purpose of extending the circle of their power. This led me to think that the nations of Christendom would perhaps eventually undergo some sort of oppression like that which hung over several of the nations of the ancient world. But it would seem that if despotism were to be established among the democratic nations of our days, it might assume a different character, different from the Roman Empire, for example. It might be more extensive and more mild. It would degrade men without tormenting them. I do not question that in an age of instruction and equality like our own, sovereigns might more easily succeed in collecting all political power into their own hands, and might interfere more habitually and decidedly within the circle of private interests than any sovereign of antiquity ever could do. But the same principle of equality which facilitates despotism tempers its rigor. When no member of the community has much power or much wealth, tyranny is, as it were, without opportunities or a field of action. As all fortunes are scanty, the passions of men are naturally circumscribed, their imagination limited, their pleasures simple. This universal moderation moderates the sovereign himself and checks within certain limits the inordinate stretch of his own desires. Independently of these reasons, drawn from the nature of the state of society itself, I might add many others arising from causes beyond my subject, but I shall keep within the limits I have laid down to myself. Democratic governments may become violent and even cruel at certain periods of extreme effervescence or of great danger. Excuse me, think of George Bush and 9/11. But these crises will be rare and brief. When I consider the petty passions of our contemporaries, the mildness of their manners, the extent of their education, the purity of their religion, the gentleness of their morality, their regular and industrious habits, and the restraint with which they almost all observe in their vices, no less than in their virtues, I have no fear that they will meet with tyrants in their rulers, but rather guardians. I think then that the species of oppression by which democratic nations are menaced is unlike anything that ever existed before in our world. Our contemporaries will find no prototype of it in their memories. I am trying myself to choose an expression which will accurately convey the whole of the idea I have formed of it, but in vain. The old words, despotism and tyranny, are inappropriate. The thing itself is new, and since I cannot name it, I must attempt to define it. I seek to trace the novel features under which despotism may appear in the world. The first thing that strikes the observation is an immutable multitude of men, all equal and alike, incessantly endeavoring to procure the petty and paltry pleasures with which they glut their lives. Think now of a television society. Each of them, living apart, is as a stranger to the fate of all the rest. His children and his private friends constitute to him the whole of mankind. As for the rest of his fellow citizens, he is close to them, but he sees them not. He touches them, but he feels them not. He exists, but in himself and for himself alone. And if his kindred still remain to him, he may be said at any rate to have lost his country. Above this race of men stands an immense and tutelary power, which takes upon itself alone to secure their gratifications and to watch over their fate. Facebook? That power is absolute, minute, regular, provident, and mild. It would be like the authority of a parent if, like that authority, its object was to prepare men for manhood, but it seeks, on the contrary, to keep them in perpetual childhood. It is well content that people should rejoice, providing that they think of nothing but rejoicing. For their happiness, such a government willingly labors, but it chooses to be the sole agent and only arbiter of that happiness. It provides for their security, foresees and supplies their necessities, facilitates their pleasures, manages their principal concerns, directs their industry, regulates the descent of property, and subdivides their inheritances. What remains but to spare them all the care of thinking and all the trouble of living? Thus, it every day renders the exercise of the free agency of man less useful and less frequent. It circumscribes the will within a narrower range and gradually robs a man of all the uses of himself. The principle of equality has prepared men for these things. It has predisposed men to endure them and oftentimes to look on them as benefits. I have always thought that the servitude of the regular, quiet, and gentle kind, which I have just described, might be combined more easily than is commonly believed with some of the outward forms of freedom, and that it might even establish itself under the wing of the sovereign of the people. Our contemporaries are constantly excited by two conflicting passions. They want to be led, and they wish to remain free. As they cannot destroy either one or the other of these contrary propensities, they strive to satisfy them both at once. They devise a sole, tutelary, and all-powerful form of government, but elected by the people. They combine the principle of centralization and that of popular sovereignty. This gives them a respite. They console themselves for being in tutelage by the reflection that they have chosen their own guardians. And it continues. It's a brilliant book, A Democracy in America.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, Grover Norquist, president of Americans for Tax Reform. ATR.org is the website. You can tweet him at Grover Norquist. And Grover, welcome back. It's been it seems like it's been a couple of years since you've been on the program.
It has been. Delighted to join you.
Thank you. And now that I'm no longer in D.C. and Ellen Ratner's no longer running dinner parties, we're going to have to figure out a different place to meet. I don't believe that I'm reading this. This publicist pitch from you. It says, according to the Cleveland Clinic, the normal respiration rate for an adult at rest is 12 to 20 breaths per minute. According to congressional Democrats, it says 12 to 20 times per minute that an adult human is exhaling a taxable pollutant, carbon dioxide. Did you really say that?
I don't think so, but
okay.
But if you're taxing carbon and the production of carbon dioxide, people breathing, they do that.
But that's not the production of carbon dioxide. That's the recycling of carbon dioxide. The production of carbon dioxide is when you take it from where it's been stable under the ground for hundreds of millions of years and put it into the carbon cycle, into the air, the water, into plant matter and things like that, which is a whole completely different thing. Did you miss seventh grade science?
No, the question is the advocates of a carbon tax or a tax on carbon dioxide, whether that's a good idea or not. And of course, I tend to think that both the level of spending by federal, state, and local governments and the level of taxing is already too high, and adding an energy tax on top of that is what Al Gore and Clinton tried in '93. It was part of costing them the House and the Senate, and we're going to have a vote in Congress in the next couple of weeks where Congressman, Republican, and Democrat can stand up in front of the American people and either say, I'm opposed to a carbon tax, or I'm not opposed to a carbon tax. So we're just going to sort of separate where people are, and it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see. The Democratic platform endorses a carbon tax. The Republican platform says no to a carbon tax. So there's a difference there, and I think it's worth letting the American people know about and calculating how much a carbon tax would cost them in heating their house, cooling their house, driving their car, buying things at a store that were brought to the store by railroads or by trucks. It's a
great way to, no need to filibuster this, Grover. I mean, great way to try to define the argument while completely ignoring the elephant in the room. The fact of the matter is that since the mid-19th century, when we began taking carbon that had been sequestered in the ground for tens to hundreds of millions of years and inserting it into the atmosphere, what we are seeing is that the atmosphere is warming up. The consequence of that is that our storms are getting more violent. We just had hundreds of billions of dollars and tens of thousands, arguably hundreds of thousands of deaths as a direct response to the policies that you are an advocate for. You personally and the billionaires, the fossil fuel billionaires who support you and your friends are encouraging the death of the earth. And here you are saying that, yeah, there's people dying from climate change related stuff, particularly in Bangladesh and places like that. You've got northern Syria. You had, the desert came south 100 miles, so you had an extra, million farmers now out of work showing up in the cities of Syria, leading to the civil war, arguably the entire Middle Eastern thing. You are completely failing to acknowledge that the poison that the people funding you want to continue to put into our air are not only killing us, not only increasing cancer rates, not only ruining the planet, but also are costing us a pile of money. And you don't want your billionaire owners to have to pay for the external expenses, the externalities, the costs of the poison that they're putting into the atmosphere. I think that is unconscionable, Grover. I don't understand how anybody holding those kind of positions can even sleep at night.
Okay, we done with the filibuster?
Your turn.
Okay, good, thank you. Two things. When you tax a product that is not paid for by the company that makes it, that is paid for by the consumer. One of the tricks that statists who want larger government always put out is, oh, we're going to tax companies, or we're going to tax opioids, or we're going to tax something like energy. And then that's going to be paid for by an energy company. No, it's not. It's going to be paid for by consumers who don't, would like to.
Are you telling me
be able to
these
drive
energy
their car to
companies
work
can't dial
or
back their dividends or cut back on the billions that they're handing off to their CEOs? You telling me that the Koch brothers just have to have another 10 or 20 billion dollars next year?
Well, in economics, you may be familiar with the concept that capital is mobile. And capital goes to where people invest, to where they get the best return.
Right, and so if a company needs to compete with another company, they can dial back on their executive compensation, and rather than their CEOs making, $40 million this year, they can only make $10 million this year.
Right, and as opposed to raising prices, is your argument?
Yeah.
Okay.
As we see in every industry. I mean, this is business 101.
Okay. When you put taxes on particular products, at the end of the day, the only person who pays for that are consumers.
But Grover,
that's the
this
only
is
way
not
any
a tax.
company gets any money.
This is the recovery of an expense that is being dumped on us, like the fossil fuel industry, Koch Industries, ExxonMobil, these companies. They are crapping on us. They are dropping trow and positioning their butts above the top of all of us and crapping on us. They are fouling our planet. They are killing people. They're destroying lives, and you're defending them.
No, two things. My interest is in not raising the amount of money that is taken from the American people and handed over to the state.
Then stop these guys from polluting our air in ways that jack up the costs of our disasters and that cause more cancers.
Okay. I had a very interesting conversation with Al Gore. And
you are not responding to anything I'm saying here, Grover. Why do you keep changing the subject?
Because you want to talk about not the tax, you want to talk about something else.
I want to talk about recovering from these fossil fuel billionaires, the damage that they are doing to us.
If you or anybody on the left was concerned at all about carbon, you'd be out promoting nuclear power. The reason why we have more carbon
nuclear power is not carbon neutral.
Trashed nuclear power decades ago.
Nuclear power is not carbon neutral, Grover. You know that.
For helping, that would be useful.
Nuclear power is not carbon neutral. It takes carbon to mine uranium. It takes carbon to transport uranium. It takes carbon to refine uranium. It takes carbon, massive amounts of carbon, to create concrete container shells. In fact, the average nuclear power plant doesn't produce its first its first kilowatt of carbon-free electricity for at least 16 years. Nuclear power is no solution. But on the other hand, wind and solar are both less expensive than fossil fuels if we stop subsidizing your friendly local billionaires.
Same thing is true about solar. What do you make solar energy out of? What are all the things you dig out of the ground in order
Absolutely
to put all that
agree, but the recovery cost on solar is a year or two. The recovery cost on nuclear power is 16 to 17 years. There's a world of difference, and you know that.
Well, two things. If you didn't have the kind of bureaucratic rules that were set down to cripple the nuclear power industry, the cost would be much less, and the timetable would be a fraction of what they are today.
You're talking about Price-Anderson, where we subsidize the nuclear power industry to the tune of hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars?
And the delays
I'm all in favor of getting rid of that subsidy. That'll end the nuclear power industry, as you know.
Okay. The question is, well, there's several questions here. One is, this is just the latest.
No, there's a really simple question, Grover, and you haven't answered it. Why do you want to force me to pay through my tax dollars to subsidize FEMA and through my tax dollars to subsidize health care in the United States? Why do you want me to pay for the disasters caused by the Koch brothers and ExxonMobil and for the cancers caused by the Koch brothers and ExxonMobil? I don't understand. Why do you want me to pay that?
I don't think, as a matter of fact, that I'm on record in favor of the state taking over those functions of government.
The state has already taken over those functions.
When the government runs insurance, it does a very bad job of it, and we're much better off not going and taking people's money.
Okay, so for the record, what you're saying is if somebody gets cancer as a result of breathing polluted air from the Koch brothers refinery or from ExxonMobil's refinery, they shouldn't have health insurance because you don't want the government to be involved in that business.
Because the FDA won't approve a particular medicine, which years later we discover, after waiting long enough, would have saved thousands.
You're still not answering my question.
Of lives. No, I would argue that my question to you is the FDA has ended up, because of delays of new drugs, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Why do you tolerate that?
Nice try at changing the subject. Why don't you want the Koch brothers and ExxonMobil to have to pay for the externalities of their own product?
Yes, and when the government's product is to delay
why don't you want these fossil fuel billionaires to pay the cost that they're inflicting on me?
The government killing people.
Why don't
I'm
you
against
want
it.
these fossil fuel billionaires to have to compensate us for the damage that they are doing to our bodies and our environment? Why not? Is it just because they support the Republican Party? Is it that puerile?
Actually, what we're looking at here in the question of global cooling. I'm old enough to remember when this was global cooling, if you remember, caused by the same things that now cause used to call global warming. Now it's climate change because they have trouble pushing the other two. We also
Why
have a million
don't
years
you
history
want the
where,
fossil fuel
carbon
billionaires
goes
to
up and
have to
down and
pay
has
for the
nothing to
costs
do with
that
the
they're inflicting on
industrial
us?
situation?
Why don't you want the fossil fuel billionaires to have to pay the costs that they're inflicting on us? Why do you want them to get away scot-free with creating disasters and creating cancers? Why?
Well, two things. I answered this question at the beginning, but you didn't understand, or you're trying not to. You don't get money from companies. Companies only get money from consumers.
Not true.
Whether you
And
have
you know
a
that's not
tax
true, Grover.
or whatever, the people buy something. They have that cash, which they can then use.
It's a nice line,
invest
Grover,
and
but
build
nobody's
more stuff.
buying it anymore. I mean, maybe people bought that back during the Reagan era, but people have figured out that companies actually do pay income taxes. In fact, back in the 50s, 1/3 of our entire federal budget is paid for by corporate income taxes. Now it's only 11%.
Corporate income taxes, but the incidence of the corporate income tax is about 90% on labor. There have been recent studies on this which actually make it very clear that the amount that actually hits capital is maybe 10%, 90% on
Great
labor.
job again of deflecting,
and
but
we're seeing
why
this with the lower corporate rate.
why don't you want the fossil fuel billionaires to have to pay for the damage that they're doing to our bodies and our world?
You're not offering
Because
an
you don't think
opportunity
that they're
for
going to pay
You're
it. You
offering
think
to
they're going
raise
to pass it
taxes
along
on
to us.
citizens.
Is that your answer?
You want to pretend money comes from somebody other than citizens.
So you don't think that money comes from corporations?
Companies make money when they sell a product. They get that money from consumers.
And when they make money poisoning people, shouldn't they be held accountable for it?
Well, when the company sells, first of all, I would be very interested in a national debate where all of the science that argues that for global warming or global cooling or global climate change, whichever one you're picking this
Grover,
year.
hang on.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Grover Norquist, his
Also,
website,
we found from
atr.org, and you can tweet him at Grover Norquist. Grover, thanks for dropping by today.
You got it.
We'll talk to you soon. And welcome back. Excuse me. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Well, hey, Tom. I hope you're getting better.
I am. Thank you.
Good. I wanted to discuss hemp as related to carbon and carbon tax and all this problem of corporate ripoff and how everything's arranged by the Congress so that we can't really talk about hemp. Progress is being made in affecting the laws, but the prohibition law in the first place, when you've got the government saying we've got a copyright for this seed, well, what does China say about that? Is there any discussion about hemp in the China discussions of trade?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
And why is it that Mr. Norquist is unwilling to discuss the value of hemp in the discussion that you're trying to inspire here? Why is it that your call screener didn't want me to bring hemp up? What's the deal here?
It is peripheral to this conversation to answer your question in short form, Bob. Rick in Weston, West Virginia. Hey, Rick, what's up?
I don't understand. Why does the mainstream modern Republican Party deny verifiable science?
Because it would inhibit the profits of the billionaires and the companies owned by those billionaires that support the Republican Party. It's real simple.
Number two, what are they going to do with all this money? They going to build a spaceship and go find another planet to live on after they destroy this one? I just
They
don't
actually, number one, they're doing that, Rick. Number two, they're buying old missile silos and turning them into 100-foot underground mansions. Some of them are buying desert islands. Some of them are buying self-contained cruise ships. I mean, the rich people in this country are doing all kinds of stuff to prepare themselves for anything from the end days to the tough times, depending on how they describe it and what their particular worldviews are.
Well, they seem to forget it's a 99% to supply the manpower to fight their foolish wars, and they're just totally destroying American democracy. I guess, you wrote about the crash of 2016. I think you're off by a few years, but I bet you we'll see it by 2020. And I'm afraid what it's going to take is something like another Great Depression, or possibly even a civil war or a total social disruption to shake people up and wake them up. I hate to say it, but
yeah. And just like in the 1860s, it'll be caused by capitalism, basically.
Exactly. And there's nothing wrong with honest day's pay for honest day's work, but they're taking it extreme. I had to go pick up a prescription. It went up $800 in a 30-day period. Instead of $3,200, now it's $3,800.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And it's only in America, Rick. It's only in America this kind of thing happens. There's no other country in the world, no other developed country in the world that allows their pharmaceutical industry, their health insurance industry, their hospital industry, and their physician industry to rip off their citizens the way that the United States does. Rick, thanks for the call. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Scott in Alameda, California. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I'm calling about Grover Norquist's comments about 20 years ago it was Ice Age and now it's global warming. Well,
right.
It's all tied together. You know when I first heard about what do they call it, the Arctic vortex and the collapse of the jet stream? You know when I first heard about that?
You mean the collapse?
10 years ago.
Yeah.
10 years ago with global warming. And what they said was that Western Europe would experience a new ice age.
Yeah, I wrote a piece to that effect 2 weeks ago in Alternate. There's a major concern that the Gulf Stream, what's called the meridional overturning current or something like that.
It has to do with ocean surface temperatures. Okay,
That's
and
correct.
What it is cold water sinks and warm water does not sink. So when the cold water sinks, you get this churning and you get this movement, and it moves warm air east or towards Western Europe, okay, from the
Correct.
Caribbean, all right? And it feeds sea life because the material moves around and you get different layers of
Right, the settling cold water
system.
draws nutrients down to the depths of the ocean. Yeah.
Let me just say this, Tom. I have some big problems with you and Lamar Waldron's JFK stuff because I'm a student of it, and you've got some problems, and I would love to discuss it with you later. But I am so proud of you the way you punched Grover Norquist in the nose.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay.
Fantastic.
All right. Scott, thanks for the call. Catherine in Las Vegas. Hey, Catherine, what's up? Oh, hey, Catherine, I'm sorry. We're hitting a break. I'm going to put you back on hold. We'll be right back. I think we missed it. Catherine?
Yes.
We got 30 seconds. Do you have a quick one, or you want me to hold you over till the next to the end of the break?
Well, I have two quick ones. I can wait if you want to hold over.
Okay, I'm going to put you on hold here because it's not really fair to somebody to put them on with 20 seconds to go. This was Grover Norquist's sales pitch to us from his publicist. According to the Cleveland Clinic, the normal respiration rate for an adult at rest is 12 to 20 breaths per minute. According to congressional Democrats, that's 12 to 20 times a minute that a human adult is exhaling a taxable pollutant, carbon dioxide. No, progressive liberals have not proposed taxing breathing, not yet, but they do want a carbon tax, which is just nuts. See, this is a classic example of setting up a straw man, in other words, a phony argument, literally completely phony argument, and then knocking that straw man down and saying, ha ha, we declared victory. The liberals want to tax your breathing. No, they never did. No.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a second. Stick around. Today we're reading from Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power by Noam Chomsky. Brand new book. From the preface, a note on the American dream. During the Great Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, it was bad, much worse objectively than today. But there was a sense that we'll get out of this somehow, an expectation that things are going to get better. Maybe we don't have jobs today, but they'll be coming back tomorrow and we can work together for a brighter future. This was a time of a lot of political radicalism that would hopefully lead to a different future, one with more justice, equality, and freedom. Breaking down repressive class structures, and so on. There was just a general sense that this will work out somehow. Most of my family, for instance, were unemployed working class. The rise of the union movement itself was a reflection of, and a source of, optimism and hopefulness. And that's missing today. Today there's a general feeling that nothing's coming back. It's over. The American dream, like most dreams, has large elements of myth to it. Part of the 19th century dream was the Horatio Alger story. We're dirt poor, but we're going to work hard and we'll find a way out of it, which was true to an extent. Take my father, who came in 1913 from a very poor village in Eastern Europe. He was able to get a job in a sweatshop in Baltimore and gradually work himself up to the point where he could go to college, get a degree, and finally even a PhD. He ended up living what's called a middle-class lifestyle. A lot of people could do that. It was possible for immigrants from Europe in the early days to achieve a level of wealth, privilege, freedom, and independence that wouldn't have been imaginable in their countries of origin. But now we simply know that that's not true anymore. Social mobility, in fact, is lower here than it is in Europe. But the dream persists, fostered by propaganda. You hear it in every political speech. Vote for me, you'll get the dream back. They all reiterate it in similar words. You even hear it from people who are destroying the dream, whether they know it or not. But the dream has to be sustained. Otherwise, how are you going to get people in the richest, most powerful country in world history with extraordinary advantages to face the reality that they see around them? Inequality is really unprecedented. If you look at total inequality now, it's like the worst periods of American history. But if you refine it more closely, the inequality comes from the extreme wealth in a tiny sector of the population, a fraction of the 1%. There were periods like the Gilded Age in the 1890s and the Roaring '20s and so on, when a situation developed rather similar to this, but the current period is extreme. Because if you look at the wealth distribution, the inequality comes mostly from super wealthy, literally The top 0.1% are just super wealthy. This is the result of over 30 years of a shift in social and economic policy. If you check, you find that over the course of these years, the government policy has been modified completely against the will of the population to provide enormous benefits to the very rich. And for most of the population, the majority, real incomes have almost stagnated for over 30 years. The middle class, in that sense, that unique American sense, is under severe attack. A significant part of the American dream is class mobility. You're born poor, you work hard, you get rich. The idea that it's possible for everyone to get a decent job, buy a home, get a car before their children go to school, and have their children go to school, it's all collapsed. Take a look at American society. Imagine yourself looking down from Mars. What do you see? In the United States, there are professed values like democracy. In a democracy, public opinion is going to have some influence on policy, and then the government carries out actions determined by the population. That's what democracy means. It's important to understand that privileged and powerful sectors have never liked democracy, and for very good reasons. Democracy puts power into the hands of the general population and takes it away from the privileged and powerful. It's a principle of concentration of wealth and power. Concentration of wealth yields concentration of power, particularly so as the cost of elections skyrockets, which forces the political parties even more deeply into the pockets of major corporations. This political power quickly translates into legislation that then increases the concentration of wealth. So fiscal policy, like tax policy, deregulation, rules of corporate governance, and a whole variety of measures, political measures designed to increase the concentration of wealth and power, yields more political power to do the same thing. And that's what we've been seeing. So we have this kind of vicious cycle in progress. I mean, the wealthy always did have an inordinate amount of control over policy. Actually, that goes back centuries. It's so traditional that it was described by Adam Smith in 1776. You read the famous Wealth of Nations. He says in England, quote, "The principal architects of policy are the people who own the society." In his day, in Adam Smith's day, merchants and manufacturers. And they make sure that their own interests are very well cared for, however grievous the impact on the people of England or others. Now, it's not merchants and manufacturers, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations. The people who Adam Smith called the masters of mankind, and they're following the vile maxim, all for ourselves and nothing for anyone else. They're just going to pursue policies that benefit them and harm everyone else. Well, that's a pretty general maxim of politics that's been studied closely in the United States. Those are the policies that have increasingly been followed. And in the absence of a general popular reaction, that's pretty much what you'd expect. Then we get into principle number 1, reduce democracy. And, he goes through his 10 principles. The book, Requiem for the American Dream. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. Catherine in Las Vegas. Hey, Catherine, thanks for listening to SiriusXM. What's up?
Well, thanks for taking my call. So 2 quick things. First, about the Grover Norquist. His entire argument is based on the premise that the only thing that increases your cost is taxes, and this all gets paid to you, as if everything else is not factored into the cost. Right. But if you do the analysis, paying for the carbon tax is significantly cheaper than, for example, I live in Las Vegas, but after the last round of hurricanes, my insurance went up too because that cost is spread to us, just like the cost of cancers is spread to us. Yep. So we're paying for it. So it's cheaper for us to pay the carbon tax than it is for us to pay for Category 5 hurricanes. Let's just make that clear.
Amen.
Okay, and then the second point is to go back to the Iran nuclear deal. My biggest concern about this, that I don't know that people have taken that extra step forward, is that this is setting up a confrontation between the U.S. and its NATO allies, because our allies are planning to stay in the deal when we back out. Now, there's a big argument to be made that the purpose of us backing out is to create an excuse for military engagement with Iran, which, when our allies who are, lifting the sanctions that we're imposing, that sort of thing, are set up in conflict with us, they will have to choose between upholding their NATO alliances when we take on military engagement or upholding their deal. And it plays directly into Russia's hands, but it more so absolutely weakens Western Europe, and I think I don't know that people have thought of that consequence.
It also plays into the hands of the fossil fuel billionaires in this country, and let's not kid ourselves. That is arguably the most potent political force in the nation. When the Koch brothers say that they're going to drop $400 million in a midterm election when they dropped over or nearly $1 billion in the last election, and their principal thing is making sure that they can continue to pollute without having to pay the price of it. There's this whole whole dynamic of who benefits, and if you ask who benefits from blowing up the Iran deal, prior to a year and a half ago, the who benefits would principally be U.S. refiners and oil companies. But what happened a year and a half ago was that we changed a law that was put into place, I believe, by Nixon in the late 70s or late 60s, early 70s, in response to the Arab oil embargo, which made it illegal for any oil companies in the United States to export crude oil. You could export gasoline, you could export diesel fuel, but you couldn't export crude oil. And so, we were, this is, therefore the Keystone XL pipeline going all the way down to the Gulf Coast. So we could take crude oil and ship it to where the shipping lanes are so it could be refined in Texas. The poisons would stay in the United States, but the cleaned gasoline and diesel fuel then would go to China and South America and to Europe. But now that they can export raw oil, and the United States is awash in raw oil, if we can take Iran's oil production off the market, the domestic oil producers, and there's hundreds of these companies now, there's a half a dozen that are really, really large, but there's a bunch of them that are relatively small, but very profitable, and they are political players. They all will see a huge advantage if oil goes to $80 or $90 a barrel, and that huge advantage will be realized if they can blow up the Iran deal. So I think that blowing up the Iran deal has gone beyond just the people who are basically Netanyahu suck-ups, and it's gone beyond just the people who support ISIS and ISIL and Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni groups, and now it includes a large business cohort beyond just the military-industrial complex that loves wars. It now goes to the entire fossil fuel industry in the United States. Does that make sense, Catherine?
Yes, it does make sense. But the biggest restrainer of sort of, I don't want to say of corporate greed is basically the socialized democracies of Western Europe
and taxes.
And so if they can break up those alliances and the strength of Western Europe, there is literally nothing left to restrain them.
Yeah, excellent point. Excellent point. Catherine, thank you. Well said. Paula in Gig Harbor, Washington. Hey, Paula, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Listen, I want to talk about climate change for a minute. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so I've spent a lot of time on YouTube in the past year or so. Stuart Scott with the United Planet Faith and Science Initiative, Dr. Peter Wadhams, I think he's from Cambridge.
Yeah, I know Peter.
Dr. Guy McPherson.
I know Guy.
Previously of ASU, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all these people, every single one of them, we're done here on Earth, Tom. It's over.
Well, Peter's not saying it's over. Peter's saying if we don't do something soon, it's over. Guy is saying it's way over and there's nothing you can do about it. The first guy you mentioned, I'm not familiar with. I'm sorry.
Oh, you should check him out, Stuart Scott, United Planet Faith and Science Initiative.
Okay.
He has lots of things on YouTube, and he goes to all these conferences, the climate conferences around the world. But, Tom, maybe 40 years ago we had a chance to turn this around. But now we don't do anything. What are we talking about? We're talking about oil.
Right.
Why are we talking about oil?
Right.
I live out in the country here. Someone just clear-cut 21 acres of trees. Now, if we're clear-cutting all the trees, there's just nothing we can do.
Yeah.
Nobody's changing their behavior. Nobody stops flying. Nobody stops driving. I just don't know what. What, Tom? Tell me what.
Well, what we have to do is change the incentives, Paula. Right now, and government defines those incentives, and it does it largely through tax policy and variations on tax policy, like tariff policy and rebate policy and subsidy policy and things like that. But basically, right now, we have a fossil fuel industry, oil, gas, and coal. None of which, of those three parts of the fossil fuel industry, none of which are paying the true costs of our use of fossil fuel. They're not paying the true costs of our polluting our environment. They're not paying the true costs of the cancers that they cause. They're not paying the true cost of our vulnerability to countries like Saudi Arabia, who participated in attacking us on 9/11, if the reports that are out there are true. They're not covering any of those true costs. The cost of maintaining a military, the largest military the world has ever seen, largely to protect oil shipping lanes. They're not covering any of those things. And then you've got solar and wind technology coming along, and you've got governors like Rick Scott down in Florida who actually are pushing laws to make it more difficult for people in Florida to get cheap, and in some cases even free, arguably, solar energy and wind energy in other parts of the country. So there's a lot that can be done, Paula, and what it's going to take is Americans to stop listening to this kind of BS that people like Grover Norquist are putting out, that number one, corporate taxes are irrelevant, so we might as well not have them because they simply pass them along to the customer. That's not true. It's never been true. The historical record is clear, number one. And number two, that somehow breathing, exhaling carbon dioxide is the same thing as taking 100-million-year-old carbon dioxide, from a mile under the ground and throwing it into the atmosphere where it'll circulate for the next million years. These are fundamentally, these positions that Norquist and others like him are taking are fundamentally at odds with both science and economics and frankly, anything rational. And
so, Tom?
Yeah, Paul.
You really, in your heart of hearts, Tom, in your heart of hearts, do you really think this is going to happen?
Yeah, I do.
And when do you think that might happen, Tom?
I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen as the horrible consequences of climate change continue to play out in a more substantial way. A few more superstorms. If the great conveyor belt, this current that brings heat to Europe, starts to fail in a real significant way, and it's already hiccuping now. If it starts to fail in a way that causes crops to fail in Europe, you're going to see worldwide strife. What we're seeing right now in the Middle East, which was caused by climate change. All right, the desert came south 100 miles. It took down Egypt. It took down Libya. It took down Syria. In every case, we saw the same thing in Mexico, only it was economically caused, where over 1 million small Mexican farmers were driven off their farms because we chose, through our tax policy again, to support GMO corn and subsidize the export of that into Mexico under NAFTA. That wiped out those farmers. They ended up in the barrios in the cities, and now you've got economic unrest in Mexico. And many of them ended up in the United States. All of these are the early warning signs of global warming, and they're going to get worse, Paula. They're going to get worse and worse and worse. They are getting worse and worse.
Oh, Tom, I think we're toast, okay? I don't think humans will be here very much longer. You think Guy is, too much, but honestly, look at the science. The methane bombs haven't even hit yet.
Yeah, they're starting to. Paula, I'm not willing to give up. I'm just not willing to give up. I'm sorry. I get, and Paula, thank you for your call. I get Guy's position. I disagree with it. I'm not willing to give up. Not until we've tried everything. And we haven't even really started. John in Minneapolis. Hey, John, what's on your mind?
Yeah, that's a good segue for my comment.
John, your comment is going to take more than 6 seconds, and I just realized that I just went to you with 6 seconds into a break. I'm going to put you on hold, and we'll pick you up at the top of the next hour. John, thank you, thank you for holding, and my apologies for missing my cue. I was on the camera without a clock. We will be back in just a moment. We're going to check in with Talk Media News, actually. Yeah, we're going to check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world. Stick around. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. John, let's try this again. My apologies again.
Oh, no problem.
Break.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people wanting to come to our country because our foreign policy, especially in Latin America, has created such a problem. And I don't blame it on the Democrats particularly, but there's an institutionalized policy that just seems to, really be above whatever administration is voted in, and that policy is just to basically support over, democratic interest, the interest of corporations and wealthy elites and whatnot. And I think that after World War II, that was like the golden era, right after World War II, where I think we really were interested in promoting democracy. But since then, we've kind of taken the politics of empire, and I think actually we do it very well, and we probably do it better than the British did, with having all of their colonies and having actual people that they had to support who became incredibly spoiled and privileged. And, and I think that there's also privilege as far as who we actually want to support to create a democracy. We were very good about creating democracies in Western Europe after the fall of a lot of them. And, unfortunately, this is not the case today, and globalization is a whole new topic that also enters into it. So it always comes back to money, and there are a lot of people that really don't support democracy outside of this country. They think it's only for a privileged few or people of that have the same skin color, I guess, as I do, or they talk the same way and have the same culture. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, general comment, to the first hour, but I think it's something that needs to change, and it was a problem even back, when Nicaragua was taken over by the Sandinistas and the whole thing that was going on in Latin America at the time. There was literally a war, but why was there? I mean, the people were incredibly frustrated, which just opens it up to extreme politics. And what more can I say? Or Chile, or Iran. Mossadegh, Kermit Roosevelt actually created a coup d'etat. I hate the name, actually, Kermie. I like the Jim Henson version of it, but it's just so ugly. I don't know. That was a terrible thing to do to the Iranian people, and they have to live with that all the time.
No, I agree, but it seems to me that the biggest problem that we're facing right now is the rapid morphing of capitalism into state capitalism, and we're seeing China lead the charge on this.
Yeah, and I talked to a German woman this morning who is married to an American, and she said that globalization, the kind of globalization that we are, against. I mean, from what I understand, from what you have said, and just your progressive politics and progressive economic political view is really being challenged throughout all of the world, in France, in Germany, and even in Norway, in the Scandinavian countries. And the latest thing is the UK. I mean, can you imagine being Jamaican and being thrown out of the country? I mean, you were part of the Commonwealth.
Yep, absolutely right. John, thank you for the call. Welcome back. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us, Luke Vargas. You can follow him on Twitter at The Courier. He is the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News based out of the UN in New York. Luke, welcome back.
Hey, welcome. Yeah, my Twitter storm hasn't begun yet, but it will in maybe 10 minutes when the president takes the stage and lays out his case.
So you're going to live tweet the Iran deal. You're going to live tweet the Iran deal. What are your thoughts? First of all, what's on your list here of things that we should be talking about today?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've talked the Iran deal to death, but my take is Trump is going to need to seriously cook the intelligence if he is going to claim in this speech that some sort of Iranian violation of the deal is at the heart of his decision to get out of this agreement. I mean, that is sort of what Benjamin Netanyahu was trying to make the case for, or at least clear the ground for Trump to make that argument the other week. But
although Netanyahu presented absolutely no evidence whatsoever of anything that has happened since the deal was signed.
You're exactly right, and all the American intelligence assessments back up the notion that Iran has been in complete compliance with the deal. So that I would be curious if Trump even tries to make an argument that this was Iran's fault. Right. And let me just point out, I mean, I'm quite familiar with the JCPOA, as it's known, the Iranian nuclear deal, and there are two. I mean, if Iran is alleged to have violated the deal, I mean, one of the reasons the Iran deal took so long to negotiate is because they built this incredibly detailed and I think pretty viable framework to lodge a complaint about noncompliance and then adjudicate it. Right. And it basically, some people, what it says is, hey, if someone says Iran's violating the deal, you get all the 6 countries that negotiated the deal get together, they talk for 15 days, and if they can't work it out, the foreign ministers will meet, or you convene this 3-person advisory board. So 1 person from the party lodging the dispute, 1 person from Iran probably, and then an independent member of the commission, and they talk for another 15 days. If that doesn't lead anywhere, there's another 30-day period, and the Security Council would then consider and respond to the violation. And that to me is where I see the Trump administration just saying, "Screw it, we don't want to have to present to the world any claims. It's better for us just to sort of make maybe some sort of broad pass at saying Iran violated the deal, and then just sort of like air it on Fox News and then let it be that." But I am very much of the belief that one of the reasons the Trump administration has taken this tact, which is just to exit unilaterally as opposed to actually working through the mechanisms of the deal, is because they would be uncomfortable going in front of the UN Security Council and saying with a straight face that they have evidence of Iranian noncompliance. And so, yeah, the U.S. is bypassing the very dispute mechanism that was cooked into this agreement. And as we're told is going to happen in 10 minutes or so, as President Trump snaps back sanctions on the deal on Iran, it will be the United States that violates this agreement. There's paragraph 26 and paragraph 29 of the Iranian deal say basically the U.S. has to make its best efforts in good faith to prevent Iran from realizing the full benefits of lifting the sanctions. And It's pretty clear the U.S. has already
we've broken the deal. They have not. But let me just lay out something for you. Sure. And my question at the end of this is, if what I'm saying is true, why is this not part of the media narrative? The night that Barack Obama was sworn in as president, you had 14 members of Congress, including some of the most powerful Republicans in Washington, D.C., including Paul Ryan and others, meeting with Newt Gingrich and Frank Luntz at the Caucus Room restaurant to plan to absolutely destroy the Obama presidency. That Jeb Henseling said, this is the seeds of 2012 are sown here. Kevin McCarthy said, we're going to oppose him on everything, even stuff we otherwise would have supported. So they created this conspiracy of complete opposition. No, he will have no legacy. It's the exact opposite of the Reagan Legacy Project, which was funded with millions of billionaire dollars, which put a Reagan statue or a Reagan building in every single congressional district in the United States and every single country in the world. It's the exact opposite of that. Make sure that by the time Obama leaves office or within a decade after he has left office, there is not one remnant of a legacy of Obama left. No Obamacare, no Iran deal, no nothing that he did that was an accomplishment. And they spent years trashing this Iran deal without any facts at all. Total lies, simply because it was our nation's first black president and a Democrat at that, God forbid, and we have to destroy his legacy. Now that they're governing, they don't know what to do because they know that this Iran deal is the best that they're going to get. It actually does work, but they've got to keep the lie going that somehow it was terrible because Obama did it. And that is putting the entire world at risk. What do you think?
Yeah, there have been a number of analysts who have sort of conjecture that there's a racial animus here, that it was this, the proud legacy of the black president that President Trump can't stand. I feel uncomfortable weighing in on that. Just I don't have.
Well, take the racial part out of it. He just, they just don't want any Democrat to have any success.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a real case there. I mean, there is certainly a sense of hubris in the White House right now, seeing that these nuclear talks with North Korea are, occurring here, that, hey, we can fix everything. Like before we even know if there's going to be success in North Korea, they're very happy to add another crisis to their, docket here, which is incredibly risky, right? I mean, I think, and I'm going to peel a little bit away from Iran, but we even saw today that Kim Jong-un went to China, and the Chinese basically said, we support a phased, slow denuclearization, and they apparently agreed to start easing sanctions on North Korea without a full denuclearization. I mean, we got a signal today that President Trump sort of, hey, I'm going to just rush into this thing with Kim Jong-un and get the big kahuna. Like, I think that's premature. It's not certain that Trump has figured out the key to the North Korea talks. Far from it that we should, be adding another one onto it. So I think this is a very risky strategy.
Trump's being played, and I think he's being played by the anti-Obama partisans with regard to the Iran deal and Netanyahu. But anyhow, Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From the United Nations headquarters.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com. And this book was published, I believe, in the late 90s, just FYI. 1998. America feels like it's unraveling. Though we live in an era of relative peace and comfort, we have settled into a mood of pessimism about the long-term future, fearful that our superpower nation is somehow rotting from within. Neither an epic victory nor over communism nor an extended upswing of the business cycle can buoy our public spirit. The Cold War and the New Deal struggles are plainly over, but we are of no mind to bask in their successes. The America of today feels worse in its fundamentals than the one many of us remember from our youth, a society presided over by those of supposedly lesser consciousness. Wherever we look, from LA to DC, from Oklahoma City to Sun City, we see paths to a foreboding future. We yearn for civic character, but satisfy ourselves with symbolic gestures and circuses. We perceive no greatness in our leaders, a new meanness in ourselves. Small wonder that each new election brings a new jolt, its aftermath, a new disappointment. I'd add this was at the height of the Newt Gingrich and impeachment and all that kind of craziness. Not long ago, America, which is the predecessor, has really set up Donald Trump. Not long ago, America was more than the sum of its parts. Now it is less. Around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in 10 said yes when asked, "Are you a very important person?" Today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. Yet even while we exalt our own personal growth, we realize that millions of self-actualized persons don't add up to an actualized society. Popular trust in virtually every American institution, from business and governments to churches and newspapers, keeps falling to new lows. Public debts soar, the middle class shrinks, welfare dependencies deepen, and cultural arguments worsen by the year. We now have the highest incarceration rate and the lowest eligible voter participation rate of any major democracy in the world. Statistics inform us that many adverse trends, crime, divorce, abortion, scholastic aptitudes, may have bottomed out, but we're not reassured. Optimism still attaches to self, but no longer to family or community. This is the consequence of Reaganism. Most Americans express more hope for their own prospects than for their children's or the nation's. Parents widely fear that the American dream, which was there solidly for their parents and still there barely for them, will not be there for their kids. Young householders are reaching their mid-30s, never having known a time when America seemed to be on the right track. Middle-aged people look at their thin savings accounts and slim-to-none pensions, scoff at an illusory Social Security trust fund, and try not to dwell on what a burden their old age could become. Seniors separate into their own leisure world, recoiling at the lost virtue of youth while trying not to think about the future. We perceive our civic challenge as some vast, insoluble Rubik's Cube. Behind each problem lies another problem that must be solved first, and behind that lies another and another ad infinitum. To fix crime, we have to fix the family, but before we do that, we have to fix welfare, and that means fixing our budget, and that means fixing our civic spirit, but we can't do that without fixing moral standards, and that means fixing our schools and churches, and that means fixing the inner cities, and that's impossible unless we fix crime. There's no fulcrum upon which to rest a policy lever. People of all ages sense that something huge will have to sweep across America before the gloom can be lifted. But that's an awareness we suppress. As a nation, we're in deep denial. While we grope for answers, we wonder if analysis may be crowding out our intuition. The reward of the historian is to locate patterns that recur over time and to discover the natural rhythms of social experience. In fact, at the core of modern history lies this remarkable pattern. Over the past 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning, every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, a unit of time the ancients called seculum. Together, the 4 turnings of the seculum comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. The first turning is a high, an upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism, where a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new values regime implants. And the fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always these mood shifts catch people by surprise. In the current seculum, the first turning was the American high of the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy presidencies. As World War II wound down, no one predicted that America would become so confident and institutionally muscular, yet so conformist and spiritually complacent. But that's what's happened. The second turning was the consciousness revolution, stretching from the campus revolts of the mid-60s to the tax revolts of the early 80s. Before John Kennedy was assassinated, no one predicted that America was about to enter an era of personal liberation and cross a cultural divide that would separate anything thought or said after from anything thought or said before. But that's what happened. The third turning has been the culture wars, an era that began with Reagan's mid-1980s Morning in America and is due to expire around the middle of the decade, 8 or 10 years from now. Amid the glitz of the early Reagan years, no one predicted that the nation was entering an era of national drift. Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. On the line with us is Robert Wright. He is the visiting professor of science and religion at Union Theological Seminary in New York, the author of numerous books, including his most recent, Why Buddhism is True. His website, Robert Wright, WRIGHT.com, and mindfulresistance.net. You can tweet him at Robert Wright-er. Do I have that right, Robert?
That's all right so far, yeah.
Okay, great. And at Union Seminary. Robert, brilliant new book, Why Buddhism is True. I read part of it as one of our book reports here for our program. I love this book.
Thank you.
To start at the beginning, to explain Buddhism to people who have no experience with or of it, what do you say?
Well, first, I'm focusing on what you could call the naturalistic part. In other words, not things like rebirth, the kind of supernatural aspects of Buddhism. But, you know, I think at the center of Buddhism is a kind of amazing claim, which is that the reason we suffer and the reason we make other people suffer, in other words, the reason we're mean to people, is because we don't see the world clearly. And so by clarifying our vision in a sense, by clarifying our perception of ourselves, our perception of others, we'll become happier people and better people. And that's the claim that I defend in the book, and I argue that it actually makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of modern psychology and modern philosophy.
My recollection, it's been 40 years, but my recollection of the Buddha's Four Noble Truths were that number one, all life is suffering. Number two, all suffering is caused by attachment. Number three, eliminate the attachment, you eliminate the suffering. And then number four was the eightfold path to achieve that separation from attachment. Do I have that right? Is my memory still functioning?
It's close enough for our purposes.
Okay.
I mean, I could put some footnotes in there that you know, some of which are interesting, actually. I mean, for example, he did say that life is full of something that's commonly translated as suffering. The word that's translated as suffering could also be translated, some people would say, as kind of unsatisfactoriness. So a big part of suffering as Buddhism sees it is the fact that we're just never, you know, we're just kind of chronically not entirely happy with our situation. We always want things to be a little better. And when we get a thrill, it fades quickly. You know, you buy that latest thing that's going to make you happy, the coolest smartphone, you get the promotion, whatever it is that's going to make you happy, the thrill fades, and then you want a little more. So I would just say that's a big part of the suffering. It's not the only part, but it's a big part of the suffering that Buddhism sets out to address.
Dissatisfaction, yeah. So the subtitle of your book is The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. For somebody who doesn't want to sit and you know, meditate for 15 or 30 minutes a day or whatever, how do you apply the tenets, the principles of Buddhism to our modern political dialectic?
Well, I do think, I mean, I agree with the many people who have said that we have a problem in the country with political polarization, or you could call it tribalism. And I think tribalism is a problem around the world, whether it's sectarian conflict or conflict between nations, or in our case, conflict within a nation. And I think, you know, it is driven in all these cases by something you could call the psychology of tribalism. And you know, in keeping with Buddhist teaching, I think that does consist of distortions of perception and cognition. You know, again, Buddhism says we tend, you know, kind of naturally not to see the world clearly. I think we do suffer from a lot of what are now called cognitive biases, and they do drive this political polarization. A famous one now is confirmation bias. That's gotten a certain amount of attention. That's just a tendency to notice and embrace evidence that supports your pre-existing views, and to not notice or even reject, if you do notice it, evidence that seems at odds with your views. And it's interesting that you should ask, like, well, suppose you don't meditate. I think even if you don't meditate, I mean, I think you may be able to address this problem better if you do mindfulness meditation, but even if you don't meditate, here's what I'd recommend you try, is if you're on Twitter or Facebook or something and you see some politically relevant information, you know, if you're anti-Trump, it's information that isn't good for Trump. If you're pro-Trump, it's maybe information that supports him. But you start to retweet it or to share it on Facebook. I would say pay very close attention to your feelings as you do that. Ask yourself, what exactly is driving the retweeting or the sharing on Facebook? And I think if you pay enough attention, you'll notice that it's a feeling. I mean, you have like an affection for that information. You know, you like and you want to like the information that supports your side of the argument. And so really it's a feeling more than a thought, more than deliberation, that's driving you to share the information. And sometimes we do so uncritically without examining it. We don't really want to examine it. We hope that, we won't find anything wrong with it because it supports our views. So you may notice that it's a feeling that is behind this thing we call confirmation bias, which leads us to embrace this evidence consistent with our views. Now, I would say if you do mindfulness meditation every morning, you'll probably find it a little easier to notice the feelings and to stop yourself from uncritically following their promptings. In other words, finding some space for actual rational reflection before you act. Because mindfulness meditation, one of the main things it does is make you more aware of various aspects of the way your mind works, certainly including your feelings, and gives you the ability to get, in a certain sense, a kind of a critical distance from them. So there's one problem that I think we do see in play in modern politics that you can address with or without meditating. I recommend meditation. I'm an advocate, but it's not absolutely necessary.
There's one of the I think pervasive myths about Buddhist meditation and sitting in particular is that it is somehow passive, that it's weak, that it's kind of giving up, it's surrendering. Louise and I have practiced Soto Zen for decades. We started with the Atlanta Soto Zen Center years ago. I spent a week in Dharamsala and McLeod Ganj. In fact, it was made into a movie narrated by Harrison Ford, Dalai Lama Renaissance. We spent a week with the Dalai Lama, 4 hours a day, and ultimately took refuge from him.
I should be interviewing you about Buddhism. You should be interviewing me.
Well, it was fascinating because one of the things that he organized for us was these young monks, these teenage monks, doing their Tibetan Buddhist dialectic, their debate, essentially. And the debate was, what is the nature of a pot, right? And these guys would come forward and they would just, with great emphasis and shouting and waving their hands and jumping up and down. And the idea that meditation is easy and that it's not struggle, and the idea that Buddhist thought is passive, is about as far from my experience as you can get. Your reaction to that and how this can meaningfully become part of our lives in a way that doesn't just put its hooks into us and drag us off like you were talking about earlier with the distraction and seduction of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say first of all, if you think it's easy or all fun and games, go to a serious 1-week silent meditation retreat, which is what got me first got me kind of hooked on meditation. But it's very hard. I mean, you're meditating intensively all day, but first of all, you realize how hard it is to focus on your breath, which is the way you start a lot of kinds of meditation. Very hard to do. And then as the week wears on, you find yourself actually dealing with a lot of feelings you're in the habit of running away from, or dealing with by like eating junk food or changing the subject or something, and that can be very taxing and challenging. I mean, I sometimes say like going on a meditation retreat is like extreme sports for the mind, and you know, it has its dangers. It can be hard. It has its ups and downs. It has its wonderful moments, and that's why I keep coming back. But it's challenging, and you know, more fundamentally, I'd say you have to recognize like what is at the core of Buddhist philosophy is the idea that you should be able to withstand any situation whatsoever without running away from it, right? I mean, it's very stoic.
Including
it
death.
Has a lot. Go ahead, yeah.
Including death.
Including death, yeah. I mean, now of course, what you might call religious Buddhists in Asia do have the consolation of rebirth, somewhat as Christians have the consolation of heaven or the prospect of heaven. And the idea is, in that context, that if you live a good ethical life, you have a better chance at a favorable rebirth. But for the many people who are what you could call secular Buddhists or naturalistic Buddhists, and that includes a lot of the Buddhists in the West, including me, you know, there is death is one of the many things you are trying to learn how to handle stoically. And I know people who have gone further down the meditation path than I am. I mean, I'm still a novice relative to them, but in talking to them, I think they really have made their peace with it to an extent that the rest of us find very challenging. But yeah, death, pain. I mean, you know, people, serious meditation can help you cope with serious pain, back pain, or whatever. You know, anxiety is.
It can help
you.
It can help you cope with Trump.
Well, yeah, that's the biggest challenge of them all if you're of my political persuasion. But yeah.
There you go. Same here. You know, I bring my meditation practice into my debates on a daily basis. Robert Wright, Why Buddhism is True, The Science and Philosophy of Meditation and Enlightenment. Robert, thank you for dropping by.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And for writing a brilliant book.
Thanks.
Hang on just a second.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
RobertWright.com is his website, mindfulresistance.net. You can tweet him at Robert Writer, Wrighther. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Let's see here. Gene in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gene, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine.
Okay, because I have you on a speaker. I was going to call with a simple comment about Mr. Norquist's position on polluting for others. I was going to mention if I happen to live in his neighborhood and I had a large Doberman pincher, and he happened to defecate on his property, that I should not be responsible for it. But I digress.
Well, that's basically his argument. His dog is crapping on our lawn, his dog being, you know, Koch Industries and ExxonMobil, and we're just supposed to say, oh, yeah, no big problem. Let's just give him another tax break.
Yeah, okay, well, being on hold and waiting, I had a chance to gather my thoughts, and I'm still staying on topic with climate change and carbon pollution. And I wanted to say, you had a guest a while back, a fellow by the name of, and I got to keep my notes, I'm just a year younger than you, but my memory and my ability to articulate is really down the tubes here. You had a guest, Stephen Call, and he was talking about his book, The Private Empire, ExxonMobil and the American Power. It's an excellent book, and it covers a lot of issues. There's one chapter on Equatorial Guinea and the damage that has done.
Gene, your phone is breaking up pretty badly.
Oh, okay. Just a second. I'll take you off speaker. It was working there for a while.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm saying I revisited a book by a guest of yours, Stephen Cole, a while back, Private Empire, ExxonMobil, and American Power. Mm-hmm. It covers all the bases, how these petroleum conglomerates have exploited the sovereignty of especially some of these African countries. and how they've just devastated them and just left them behind. And it's just piracy. That's all it is. And having a chance to be on hold for a little while, I got the chance to review some of my notes and talk to you about this. Just a side note, I've been watching you for years, and one of my favorite books is Screwed. And, well, enough of the patronage. You know, I'm a big fan. But, people should review Stephen Cole's book on ExxonMobil and their power there.
So what's the essential message, Gene, that you found of consequence? We've got 20 seconds.
Okay. Well, that basically wraps it up. Your callers are so articulate and knowledgeable, and I'm trying to raise the bar for myself here.
So there was nothing in Call's book that you thought was worth mentioning?
Well, yes, the exploitation of Chad and Equatorial Guinea.
Okay. All right, good.
Okay,
I'll have to check it out.
That rings a bell.
Yeah. Gene, thanks a lot for the call. Fascinating stuff. We'll be back. It's coming up on 21 and a half minutes past the hour. Stick around. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Albert in Marina Del Rey, California. Hey, Albert, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I want to bring up 3 important letters that was discussed in the Grover Norquist call. It's ROI, return on investment. And I wish you would have hit return on investment. I wish you would have hit him a little bit more on this. And maybe it didn't flow with the topics, but return on investment is the main driver of growth, meaning companies don't, the first thing they're looking at is not taxes. They're looking at, can I make money first? Taxes are a byproduct of if you're able to make money.
Right.
Taxes should never be brought up in any conversation in terms of growth, because it's after you have already operated the business.
Right, and operated it profitably. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because the tax is only on the profit.
Exactly, and maybe if you could, and maybe I'll explain it. You know, dynamic scoring, for people who don't know, is basically what they're saying is if we lower the tax, you know, let's just say the tax is 20%, and we lower it at 10% to 10%. Okay, the dynamic scoring that these Republican, you know, liars like to talk about is, okay, well, what about all the investment that's going to come into the United States if we lower the taxes to 10%? Well, that's only independent if a company can come in and find an industry where they can make a profit, number one. And number two, when you do that, let's just say you lose income doing that. There's no mathematical formula in terms of, you know, government, in terms of the government budget and taxes, in which it won't cause a deficit. It just doesn't mathematically add up. And once again, ROI is the biggest thing. Nobody's going to put their money where they can't make profit, even if the taxes are zero.
Yeah, excellent point, Albert. And you know, another quiver in the arrow that I could have used in that debate. Thank you for that, Albert. Thanks for the call. Betty in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Hey, Betty.
Oh, thank you, Tom. Well, Tom, before I get on to my subject, I want to tell you something. I'm 88, and I want to tell you that if you were my son, I would be very proud of you.
Thank
okay,
you.
And I'm old enough to be your mother. I know that.
Yeah.
All right. Now, my topic is, and I thought so much about this, it kind of relates to slavery and the racist issue we have in our country. But I'm thinking, my conclusions are, from the beginning of time, civilization has been shaped by a master-slave structure. No matter all the way down through history, no matter where you get to, emperors, kings, you know, fiefdoms, you know.
Let me just qualify that, if I may, very briefly, Betty. Since it's not from the beginning of time, it's from the beginning of the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago.
Well, yes.
Prior to that, if you look at older societies, they did not have hierarchy. They did not have kingdoms. They did have basically communism. They had social safety nets that were vigorous and strong, and one for all and all for one. Back to you, Beth.
But I do think that we even see in the animal kingdom, which I do believe in evolution, we do see in the animal kingdom that usually there is a stronger one in control of a group. But nevertheless, how this relates to present-day racism, I believe that if the black people in the United States would realize that slavery has been such a common thing, that we have a commonality of people who have been forced to be slaves of one kind or another all through, as you said, since the agricultural age, I think even before. But nevertheless, if we could get the concept of the commonality that we have, whether it's wage slavery, whether it's skin color, whether it's whatever it's based on and whatever they do in their form of control, we have that in common. Yet our country is divided nearly like 50-50, when in fact 90% of us should be sticking together on that common ground that we have, that we have all been enslaved in one way or another. I'm thinking of my father who worked day and night, to support us without a union, no benefits, no anything, etc. And it seems somehow we cannot get that feeling of commonality. I don't know if it's acquiescence.
I think the way to do that, Betty, is to go back to FDR and say, a necessitous man is not a free man. You're not free if you don't have a decent job. You're not free if you don't have health care. You're not free if you don't have housing. You're not free if you don't have access to medicine. And you're not free if you don't have access to a good education. And that is the core of every developed country in the world. And, to take your point and expand it. And I think that that's how you keep kings and oligarchs under control. Betty, excellent points all. Thank you so much. And thanks for your kind words. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Talk media for the rest of us. Back with your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Notes on Debates in the Federal Convention of 1787, reported by James Madison. That would be the Constitutional Convention where everybody got together and wrote the Constitution. This is from Wednesday, August 22nd. Article 7, Section 4, resumed. Mr. Sherman was, and this is Madison's notes, so he's reporting what Mr. Sherman said. Mr. Sherman was for leaving the clause as it stands. He disapproved of the slave trade. Yet as the states were now possessed of the right to import slaves, as the public good did not require it to be taken from them, and as it was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government. The proposal, by the way, was to ban the importation of slaves after 1808 with the assumption that the states would rapidly end slavery shortly thereafter. And you'll hear that in just a minute. It was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government. He thought it best to leave the matter as we find it. He observed that the abolition of slavery seemed to be going on in the U.S. and that the good sense of the several states would probably by degrees complete it soon. He urged on the convention the necessity of dispatching its business. Colonel Mason spoke. This infernal traffic originated in the avarice of British nations. The British government constantly checked the attempts of Virginia to put a stop to it. The present question concerns not the importing of slaves alone, but the whole Union. The evil of having slaves was experienced during the late war. Had slaves been treated as they might have been by the enemy, they would have proved dangerous instruments in their hands. What he's talking about is the British offering slaves freedom if they came and fought for the British. But their folly dealt by the slaves as it did by the Tories. He mentioned the dangerous insurrections of the slaves in Greece and Sicily and the instructions given to by Cromwell to the commissioners sent to Virginia to arm the servants and slaves in case other means of obtaining its submission should fail. Maryland and Virginia had had already prohibited the importation of slaves expressly. North Carolina had done the same in substance. All this would be in vain if South Carolina and Georgia were at liberty to import. The Western people are already calling out for slaves for their new lands and will fill that country with slaves if they can be got through South Carolina and Georgia. Slavery discourages arts and manufactures. The poor despise labor when performed by slaves. They prevent the immigration of whites. They produce the most pernicious effect on manners. Every master of slaves is born a petty tyrant. They bring the judgment of heaven on a country. As nations cannot be rewarded or punished in the next world, they must be in this. By an inevitable chain of causes and effects, providence punishes national sins by national calamities. He lamented that some of our Eastern brethren had, from a lust of gain, embarked in this nefarious traffic. As to the states being in possession of the right to import, this was the case with many other rights now to be properly given up. He held it essential in every point of view that when the general government should have the power to the general government should have the power to prevent the increase of slavery. Mr. Ellsworth rose to spoke. As he had never owned a slave, could not judge on the effects of slavery on character. He said, however, that if it was to be considered in a moral light, we ought to go farther and free those already in our country. As slaves also multiply so fast in Virginia and Maryland that it is cheaper to raise than import them, whilst in the sickly rice swamps foreign supplies are necessary, if we go no further than is urged, we shall be unjust toward South Carolina and Georgia. Let us not intermeddle. As population increases, poor laborers will be so plenty as to render slaves useless. Slavery in time will not be a speck in our country. Provision is already made in Connecticut for abolishing it, and the abolition has already taken place in Massachusetts. As to the danger of insurrections from foreign influence, that will become a motive to kind treatment of the slaves and former slaves. Mr. Pinckney, if slavery be wrong, it is justified by the example of all the world. He cited the case of Greece, Rome, and other ancient states, the sanction given by France, England, Holland, and other modern states. In all ages, one half of mankind had been slaves. If the southern states were let alone, they would probably of themselves stop importations. He would himself, as a citizen of South Carolina, vote for it. An attempt to take away the right as proposed will produce serious objections to the Constitution, which he wished to see adopted. General Pinckney rose to speak and declared it to be his firm opinion that if himself and all his colleagues were to sign the Constitution and use their personal influence, it would be of no avail towards obtaining the assent of their constituents. South Carolina and Georgia cannot do without slaves. As to Virginia, she will gain by stopping the importation. Her slaves will rise in value, and she has more than she wants. It would be unequal to require South Carolina and Georgia to confederate on such unequal terms. He said the royal assent before the Revolution had never been refused to South Carolina, as to Virginia. He contended that the importation of slaves would be for the interest of the whole Union. The more slaves, the more produce to employ the carrying trade, the more consumption also, and the more of this, the more of revenue for the common treasury. He admitted it to be reasonable that slaves should be dutied like other imports, but should consider a rejection of the clause as an exclusion of South Carolina from the Union. Mr. Baldwin rose to speak, said he had conceived national objects alone to be before the convention, not such as like the present were of a local nature. Georgia was decided on this point. That state was always hitherto supposed a general government, and on it goes. It's a fascinating insight into what these guys were thinking and debating.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say, no, not a chance. So Trump has pulled us out of the Iran deal. So the question, does the rest of the world care? It's going to be real interesting to find out, because if China and Russia and the UK and France and Germany, the other countries that negotiated this deal, all say to Iran, you know, we're still with you. We'll work this thing out. You guys stay denuclearized, and we'll continue to not embargo you and treat you well. Could it be that the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia find ourselves standing on the outside looking in? You know, the three arguably hardest right countries of consequence in the world, the rest of the world is ignoring us, saying, yeah, we'd rather have, you guys can have your wars, have fun, but we're gonna have peace here. That, in my mind, that would be the optimal outcome, right? Is if Iran says, yeah, Trump's gone nuts. He's playing to his Republican base. They hated President Obama. Anything Obama did, they've got to trash, regardless of whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. The average American has no idea what's in the Iran deal because the news media is so pathetic. All the average American knows is what Trump says, and Trump lies. We all know that. And the Republicans around him lie aggressively, constantly. It's how they keep the money coming from the Kochs and others, denying climate change and stuff like that. And so, if the rest of the world just goes, come on, this is BS. This guy is doing this because, he hates Obama. We don't hate Obama. We're not going to go along with this. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how the world responds, right? There's going to be a couple of days here where we're going to be watching responses coming in. Macron tried to convince Trump that he was doing something stupid. Merkel tried to convince him he was doing something stupid. Even Boris Johnson, Theresa May's foreign secretary, comes over and says, hey, you're doing something stupid. Trump's like, I don't care. My base, is stupid. They want stupid. So here we are. Ralph in Marion, Virginia. Hey, Ralph, what's on your mind? No Ralph. Okay, let's try Wendy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Hey, Wendy, what's on your mind?
Hi, I just want to let you know I'm a first-time caller.
Well, thank you.
I've been listening to you for years.
Well, thank you.
I'm very shy. To believe it or not, I'm an actress, but boy, when I get on the phone, I don't do very good. So please be patient with me.
It's quite all right. Sure. What's on your mind?
Okay. I just wanted to. I listened to Groover. Is that what his name was?
Grover. Yeah.
Grover. Okay. Yeah. And he just brought up all these typical talking points on climate denial. I've been on Facebook for I don't know how long. Since the beginning of its time. But anyhow, I've been arguing with deniers for many, many, many years. Mm-hmm. And actually, to tell you the truth, I used to be Republican, but because of climate change, I am now a Democrat. Yeah. And actually, it was Bernie that pulled me over, basically. But cool. My husband is also a Republican. And he's been working on alternative energy for many, 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 many years. So we're very much on the same plane as far as this whole thing, what's going on, and so I just want to let you know that. One thing that my husband did do is they gave me this book. It's called The Longest Summer. Have you ever heard of it?
No.
Yes, it's written by Brian Fagan, and it talks about how climate has influenced history. Mm-hmm. How we react. Particular civilizations. They have drought. And so they had to give up, pack and move and go someplace else, that sort of thing. Yep. Basically what happened to the Aztecs and the Mayans and all that kind of stuff. And, he goes into he starts from, the time since the dawning of the monolithic, right? The agricultural, agriculture came in.
Yeah, the Neolithic. Yeah.
And, the monolithic. And one thing that he brings up, after I got through reading the book, it gave me this real strange conclusion that because of our climate, because of our stable climate, that we were able to establish civilization. Basically, growing crops, and then able to growing crops, we were able to build our cities, and we were able to develop art and culture and all that kind of stuff. So, climate basically is like at the foundation of the pyramid, and everything is built on top of that. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about that is that since we built all on top of that, and being able to develop technologies and stuff like that to get old carbon out of the ground, we're basically destroying that climate. So in a sense, it's pretty much like a paradox. And it's kind of discouraging when you think about that, but seeing that I'm an optimist, I'm thinking, well, as human beings and having a brain and all that kind of stuff, we don't need to make that paradox. We can get out of that. And if we don't, then the cost is actually the climate that enabled us to build civilization.
Right. And survive. frankly. I mean, you know, the climate,
that's right. I mean,
climate on this
can't go
planet has
back
turned
to-
against life 5 times, and each time it's wiped out most of life.
Yes. So, like I said, I just came to that realization, and it's like I just wanted to share that with you and see what you said about that. But you know, because you talk about how things were billions of years now. Climate. The thing about climate deniers is they said, oh, the climate's been changing for billions of years and billions of years, but they don't realize is that the reason why we have civilization is because of a predictable climate.
Right.
We have
and it has never
fall, winter,
right, and
spring,
it has never
comes.
changed this rapidly. No, excellent points all. Wendy, I need to move along, but thank you. Excellent points. Bill in Santa Maria, California. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Team.
Sorry, say it again,
Right.
Bill.
Bill and Soon.
Oh, hi, Bill.
Your friends. Yeah, that was a great comment by that woman, that last woman. Another thing to point out that I'm trying to point out now on climate is that capitalism itself is very dependent upon climate, a stable, balanced climate.
Sure.
And that climate and capitalism is, people don't care about polar bears and trees and things like that. Those kind of people do care about money, making money, capitalism.
Right.
And there's a bunch of industries that are under threat right now, like insurance, any kind of work outside. And this is based on New York Times articles. I subscribe to the paper, and they're starting to write about this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Agriculture is a big one that's lost billions out here in California on climate change and drought.
Yep.
So, do you agree with that? That's kind of a new way to come at it.
I do, and I think that's my point. I mean, climate change is altering, it's altering our food patterns. It's altering what we can grow and where we can grow it. It's like I said, it's produced the whole Arab Spring thing, the crisis in the Middle East. Climate change produced the Iranian civil war. Climate change is provoking what's probably going to be a civil war in Bangladesh. Climate change might be pushing India and Pakistan closer and closer to nuclear war. I mean, there's some just awful stuff going on. Bill, well said. Margie in Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin. Hey, Margie, you wanted to talk about Iran?
Hi, Tom. I have a question. The U.S. unilaterally pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
Right.
Now we're pulling out of the Iran agreement, and we're not just pulling out, we're in violation of the Iran agreement.
Right. We've been in violation of it for months.
My two questions are, first of all, what country will make any agreement with us when they know that we might not keep the agreement?
Yep.
And number two, what's to keep these other nations from throwing sanctions on us? And I'll take the answers on the radio because I'm having trouble hearing you.
Sure, no problem, Margie. If the other countries, if Germany, England, France, Russia, and China were to say, and for that matter, Iran, were to say, okay, the United States is a bad actor, we're going to sanction them, and we're going to sanction their oligarchs, right? The Koch brothers, the Exxon Mobil billionaires, the other fossil fuel billionaires. We're going to put sanctions on them. I think it would be real interesting. I think it would be very, very interesting. Israel in Marion, Virginia. Hey, let's try it again, Israel. What's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Yes, I wanted to address Miss Betty, I believe her name was, the 88-year-old mother, and what she was saying about slavery and humanity. The difference that I see is when slavery started in America and in the European nations of so-called Africans, it started out humane. Now, as time passed, it became inhumane. It used to be you could work yourself free and the mother's child was born free, so on and so forth. But the treatment of the so-called African in the Americas and in Europe has been inhumane. And, I mean, they let us go with rags. They gave us malnutrition, and we worked from can't see to can't see. African Americans in this country know what that means. So I disagree with Miss Betty as far as black people have to understand. We understand. We feel that European Americans do not understand, sir.
Yeah, yeah, and very well said in Israel, and I'm always wary when myself or any other white person starts using the word slavery to describe anything other than the slavery Holocaust. And I have read stuff suggesting that the first 20, 30, 40, 50 years of imported slavery, of African slavery in the United States was less brutal than the institution we ended up with. Because it took that long for that institution, what we would today call modern policing methods, to develop to the point where it could, on a large scale, suppress and hold in slavery a large enslaved population. But that doesn't mean that it started out altruistically, or that it started out as just a fine thing. Thank you very much. It just took a while for us to build this, our version of Hitler's death camps. As our slave camps. I mean, the whole plantation system took a while, but it didn't take that long. Israel, excellent points all. Thank you for the call. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to give your listeners here some tools for combating. I heard a lot of the climate change stuff, and a lot of people, they're saying, there was one caller saying that she's now, a Democrat because of this, and whenever they bring up climate change. Part of the Republicans, what they will say when the climate change topic gets brought up is, like the man-made thing, right? Humans can't possibly control the climate of the Earth, right? You've heard that before?
Sure.
So if you go onto Wikipedia, there is a Wikipedia page for the Beijing Weather Modification Office, which in the 2008 Olympics, China came forth and said that they controlled the weather. Actually, in the early 2000s, they made it like snow in 1999. They came out to their citizens and they said that they were a world power because they could control weather.
Right,
so
and they did,
warfare,
in fact. But it was just cloud seeding.
Yeah,
I mean,
let me finish my point, Tom.
They were. Go ahead. Okay.
My point being is America used climate warfare in Vietnam, right?
Mm-hmm.
They used cloud seeding efforts. And so what's happening now is we need to call it a global weirding, because what's happening is we have pseudo-intellectuals that are looking at the data and they're saying, well, wait, this doesn't make sense. Why is this going all funky? And when you look at what DARPA has funded in terms of HARP, well, actually, DARPA didn't fund HARP, but HARP is the High Auroral, radio frequency program. There's also SCAT, which is in Europe. These entities are controlling the weather. They are. You can look it up on Wikipedia, and the American people are totally uninformed. You have Republicans still being like, we can't control the weather. I'm going to wrap it up to my second point, and I'll let you comment on it.
Yeah,
but
I think you've already wrapped it up, Robbie. Thanks a lot for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I would add, while there's no debate that dropping mercury iodide into clouds will cause them to drop rain, the idea that radio frequency waves can change the weather is still pretty controversial. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu, who told us that if we took out Saddam Hussein, that the Middle East would be a much better place, is now saying, hey, congratulations on destroying the nuclear deal with Iran. God save us. Brian in Ann Arbor. Hey, Brian, what's on your... Oh, hey, Brian, you're listening to Sirius XM. You guys are on commercial break. Hang on just a minute. Let me bring in William in Lakachizaki, Arizona. Am I saying that right, William?
Is this... Are you talking to me?
I am.
Okay. No, I'm in Sunrise Beach. I'm actually at my home base.
Oh, in Arizona?
I travel. I deliver the fifth wheels and trailers around the country. That's why I pop up at different
So this
locations.
is just where your phone is, or where your phone is from.
Yep.
So anyhow, what's up, William?
Oh, shoot.
It says here you wanted to talk about climate change?
Yeah, is there any way we can get one, like Germany did with all the solar panels on everybody's rooftop and allowed them to feed the grid?
Right.
Is there any congested county that can get some funding or something? Like I'm thinking like Orlando County or something, and just do it, click on the on switch, and show people that we can help power this whole nation.
The problem is that Rick Scott and his energy lobby buddies have passed legislation in Florida that makes it very, very expensive for you to put solar panels on your roof. You have to pay all these fees.
We have to get back to the legislation. We have to overtake the legislation again.
Right. But there's similar legislation being paid for by the fossil fuel industry and being pushed, I believe, through ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, the Koch brothers, state by state thing. where state after state after state is making it harder and harder to do wind and solar, all obviously in service of the billions that the fossil fuel billionaires want to continue to make.
There's got to be a way we can do this, because to me it's a no-brainer with the Southeast, the South, and the Southwest with the amount of sun. It's a no-brainer.
Well, even the North.
Electricity.
I mean, Germany had a couple of weeks
Germany
last.
did it, and they're no sunshine state.
No, Germany is cloudier than any other state in the United States. It is the cloudiest part of Europe, and yet they had a couple of weeks last summer where they produced absolutely no electricity that wasn't from sun or solar. Excuse me, sun
and that gets
or wind.
hardly any publication too, because of the control of the oil and the.
Well, the Europeans are familiar
I'm,
with it.
Yeah, I'm just banging my head, but the legislation problem is and the people, I think once they see it happen, they'll turn on to it very quickly.
Yeah.
They'll understand it. It's the way to go.
Well, you've got, Texas is producing 20% of their power from wind. You've got Iowa is producing a little over 20% of their power from renewable sources. But again, nobody ever does stories about this. You've got the fossil fuel industry is advertising big time on television.
Is Texas still their own grid? They're not connected to the rest of the states?
I don't know.
And I heard that once, and I think that was true.
Yeah,
at one time.
It wouldn't surprise me if they administer their own grid.
Because now I've heard that a lot of people are leaning, they're getting more socialized in the base movements. That maybe in a weird way, Texas might have one of those solar counties. Just to look at what we're doing.
It may well.
I mean, we could sell this for money, and Rick Perry's always open to selling things for money.
There you go. I mean, this is the sort of thing where if you could do proof of concept, which is what you're talking about, William, and in a way that was really obvious to everybody, I think that it would be, politically very viable. I think it would draw a lot of Republicans in. Hey, you mean I can get electricity for half the price right now? And for that matter, you can get internet for half the price, you get water for half the price, you get septic for half the price. All you have to do is take the profit motive out of all of them. They should all be part of the commons. William, thank you for the call. Excellent point. Very well made. We'll be right back. And welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler wars. Brian in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Hey, Brian, what's up?
Hi, Tom. First of all, I want to apologize for my outburst yesterday when we were talking about two-state solution. I was out of line.
Okay.
So I apologize for that. Calling today about education, you brought up and mentioned FDR, and there was no freedom without education.
Right.
Or words to that effect, if I understood that. And from what I've been doing and some research and like that, I'm convinced that 95% of the American public doesn't know the truth about so many things, and that is why the right wing is able to basically control everything. So my question, and I have a question is, okay, what do we do, or what do we have to do in order to educate in public education and offset the mainstream media about the truth of, and I'll use Palestine again as another example, because kids are not learning it in school. What do we do to get the truth out there about everything?
Yeah. That's a good question, Brian, and I think that the number one thing that we need to do, in my opinion, is break up big media. But Howard Dean suggested that, and within hours they had produced the Dean Scream. The big media took him down completely.
That is the big obstacle. That's happened to so many people.
Yep.
That somebody has the courage to stand up and say anything, they're smeared, they're marginalized.
Yep.
And we go on to the next case.
Yep, absolutely. Brian, thanks for the call. Well said. It's a big issue. It's one of the biggest issues of our time. Morris in Warren, Michigan. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for listening to Sirius
I've been
XM.
listening to you for years. This is the first time calling. And I was just listening to other few stations, and I just heard them commenting on the Iran deal. And they going by what the Prime Minister of Israel said. Mm-hmm. That's the facts that they're going off of, and them not real facts. It's just sad that they never use real facts. They always use alternative facts and never go by the truth. And I just wanted to say one more thing about all the judges that the president appointing. That's going to be bad for poor and black people.
Oh, yeah.
Because if they go in all these district courts, it's going to be terrible for us.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, he's putting in nothing but wealthy white men, by and large, and virtually all of them out of the Federalist Society. You know, this the wealthy white rich man's club, and you know, yeah, I'm totally with you, Maurice, and well said. And it's not going to turn out well for this country. And this after Mitch McConnell committed, in my opinion, treason by postponing the nomination of Merrick Garland for, you know what, a whole year. I mean, it's just nuts. Fred, listening to KBCS in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Fred, you got the last minute. What's up?
Well, I wanted to talk mainly about where E85 is going. We're talking about the environment. We're talking about global warming. We know the science is real. It's not made up. You know, Trumpy puts his hand in the fire, he's going to get burned. So that's real.
What's E85, Fred?
Real. Huh?
What is E85?
Ethanol, E85.
Oh, I see.
They produce a fuel that has 85% ethanol, 10%, 20% gas.
Right.
The auto industry doesn't want it because they figure they have to redesign their engines because the ethanol will destroy their tubes and their hoses.
Right.
Come on. That's a weak excuse. They don't want to do it because oil's in the back pocket of all this. And Trumpy's going to dance to their tune. It's a shame that we can't be more progressive when we know that when we stick the hand in the fire, we're going to get burned.
Yeah, although I think, Fred, we do need to acknowledge that the whole ethanol thing, that Monsanto and the corn industry, and I mean, you know, there's a bunch of actors in that performance that are less than ethical too. But that doesn't mean that you throw everything out. Fred, thank you for the call. Well said. Excellent points all. So, fascinating day, a lot going on. Let's keep an eye on what's going on with Trump pulling out of Iran. I suspect we're going to see some unintended consequences of great consequence. But time will tell. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.